The concept of progress acts as a protective mechanism to shield us from the terrors of the future. From Collected Sayings of Muad'Dib by the Princess Irulan. On his 17th birthday, Feyd-Rautha Harkonnen killed his 100th slave gladiator in the family games. Visiting observers from the Imperial Court, a Count and Lady Fenring, were on the Harkonnen homeworld of Gadi Prime for the event, invited to sit that afternoon with the immediate family in the golden box above the triangular area. In honor of the Na Baron's nativity and to remind all Harkonnens and subjects that Feyd-Rautha was heir designate, it was a holiday on Gadi Prime. The old Baron had decreed a meridian-to-meridian rest from labours. An effort had been spent in the family city of Harko to create the illusion of gaiety. Banners flew from buildings, new paint had been splashed on the walls along Court Way. But off the main way, Count Fenring and his lady noted that the rubbish heaps, the scabrous brown walls reflected in the dark puddles of the streets, and the furtive scurrying of the people. In the Baron's blue-walled keep there was fearful perfection, but the Count and his lady saw the price being paid. Guards everywhere and weapons of that special sheen that told a trained eye they were in regular use. There are checkpoints of routine passage from area to area even within the keep. The servants revealed their military training in the way they walked, in the set of their shoulders, in the way their eyes watched and watched and watched. The pressure's on, the Count hummed to his lady in their secret language. The Baron is just beginning to see the price he really paid to rid himself of the Duke Leto. Sometime I must recount for you the legend of the Phoenix, she said. They were in the reception hall of the keep waiting to go to the family games. It was not a large hall, perhaps 40 metres long and half that in width, but false pillars along the sides had been shaped to an abrupt taper, and the ceiling had a subtle arch, all giving the illusion of much greater space. "Ah, here comes the Baron," the Count said. The Baron moved down the length of the hall with that peculiar waddling glide imparted by the necessities of guiding suspenser-hung weight. His jowls bobbed up and down, the suspensors jiggled and shifted beneath his orange robe, rings glittered on his hands, and opal-fires shone where they had been woven into the robe. At the Baron's elbow walked Feyd-Rautha. His dark hair was dressed in close ringlets that seemed incongruously gay above sullen eyes. He wore a tight-fitting black tunic and snug trousers with a suggestion of a bell at the bottom. Soft-soled slippers covered his small feet. Lady Fenring, noting the young man's poise and the sure flow of muscles beneath the tunic, thought, "Here's one who won't let himself go to fat." The Baron stopped in front of them, took Feyd-Rautha's arm in a possessive grip, said, "My nephew, for Na Baron Feyd-Rautha Harkonnen," and turning his baby-fat face toward Feyd-Rautha, he said, "The Count and Lady Fenring of whom I've spoken." Feyd-Rautha dipped his head with the required courtesy. He stared at the Lady Fenring. She was golden-haired and willowy, her perfection of figure clothed in a flowing gown of ecru, simple fitness of form without ornament. Grey-green eyes stared back at him. She had that Bene Gesserit serene repose about her that the young man found subtly disturbing. Said the Count. He studied Feyd-Rautha. Precise young man. Ah, my, dear." The Count glanced at the Baron. "My dear Baron, you say you've spoken of us to this precise young man. What did you say?" "I told my nephew of the great esteem our Emperor holds for you, Count Fenring," the Baron said, and he thought, "Mark him well, Feyd, a killer with the manners of a rabbit. This is the most dangerous kind." "Of course," said the Count, and he smiled at his lady. Feyd-Rautha found the man's actions and words almost insulting. They stopped just short of something overt that would require notice. The young man focused his attention on the Count, a small man, weak-looking. The face was weaselish with overlarge dark eyes. There was grey at the temples, and his movements, he moved a hand or turned his head one way, then he spoke another way. It was difficult to follow. You could come upon such, preciseness so rarely," the Count said, addressing the Baron's shoulder. "I, congratulate you on the, perfection of your, in the light of the, elder, one might say." "You are too kind," the Baron said. He bowed, but Feyd-Rautha noted that his uncle's eyes did not agree with the courtesy. "When you're, ironic, that, suggests you're, thinking deep thoughts," the Count said. "There he goes again," Feyd-Rautha thought. "It sounds like he's being insulting, but there's nothing you can call out for satisfaction." Listening to the man gave Feyd-Rautha the feeling his head was being pushed through mush. Feyd-Rautha turned his attention back to the Lady Fenring. "We're, taking up too much of this young man's time," she said. "I understand he's to appear in the arena today. By the Horus of the Imperial Harem, she's a lovely one, Phaedra thought. He said, I shall make a kill for you this day, my lady. I shall make the dedication in the arena, with your permission. She returned his stare serenely, but her voice carried whiplash as she said, You do not have my permission. Fade, the Baron said. And he thought, that imp, does he want this deadly Count to call him out? But the Count only smiled and said, You really must be getting ready for the arena, Fade, the Baron said. You must be rested and not take any foolish risks. Fade bowed, his face dark with resentment. I'm sure everything will be as you wish, uncle. He nodded to Count Fenring. Sir, to the lady, my lady, and he turned, strode out of the hall, barely glancing at the knot of families mining near the double doors. He's so young, the Baron sighed. Indeed, the Count said, and the Lady Fenring thought, can that be the young man the Reverend Mother meant? Is that a bloodline we must preserve? We have more than an hour before going to the arena, the Baron said. Perhaps we could have a little talk now, Count Fenring. He tipped his gross head to the right. There's a considerable amount of progress to be discussed. And the Baron thought, let us see now how the Emperor's errand boy gets across whatever message he carries without ever being so crass as to speak it right out. The Count spoke to his lady. You will, excuse us, my dear. Each day, sometime each hour, brings change, she said. And she smiled sweetly at the Baron before turning away. Her long skirt swished and she walked with a straight-backed regal stride toward the double doors at the end of the hall. The Baron noted how all conversation among the houses minor there stopped at her approach, how the eyes followed her. Bene Gesserit, the Baron thought, the universe would be better rid of them all. There's a cone of silence between two of the pillars over here on our left, the Baron said. We can talk there without fear of being overheard. He led the way with his waddling gait into the sound-deadening field, feeling the noises of the keep become dull and distant. The Count moved up beside the Baron, and they turned, facing the wall so their lips could not be read. We're not satisfied with the way you ordered the Sardaukar of Arrakis, the Count said. Straight talk, the Baron thought. The Sardaukar could not stay longer without risking that others would find out how the Emperor helped me, the Baron said. But your nephew Raban does not appear to be pressing strongly enough toward a solution of the Fremen problem. What does the Emperor wish? The Baron asked. There cannot be more than a handful of Fremen left on Arrakis. The southern desert is uninhabitable. The northern desert is swept regularly by our patrols. Who says the southern desert is uninhabitable? Your own planetologist said it, my dear Count. But Dr. Kynes is dead. Ah, yes. Unfortunate that. We've word from an overflight across the southern reaches, the Count said. There's evidence of plant life. Has the Guildven agreed to a watch from space? You know better than that, Baron. The Emperor cannot legally post a watch on Arrakis, and I cannot afford it, the Baron said. Who made this overflight? Smuggler. Someone has lied to you, Count, the Baron said. Smugglers cannot navigate the southern reaches any better than can Raban's men. Storm, sand static, and all that, you know. Navigation markers are knocked out faster than they can be installed. We'll discuss various types of static another time, the Count said. The Baron thought. Have you found some mistake in my accounting, then? He demanded. When you imagine mistakes, there can be no self-defense, the Count said. He's deliberately trying to arouse my anger, the Baron thought. He took 2 deep breaths to calm himself. He could smell his own sweat, and the harness of the suspensors beneath his robe felt suddenly itchy and galling. The Emperor cannot be unhappy about the death of the concubine and the boy, the Baron said. They fled into the desert. There was a storm. Yes, there were so many convenient accidents, the Count agreed. I do not like your tone, Count, the Baron said. Anger is one thing, violence another, the Count said. Let me caution you. Should an unfortunate accident occur to me and here the great houses all would learn what you did on Arrakis. They long suspected how you do business. The only recent business I can recall, the Baron said, was transportation of several legions of Sardaukar to Arrakis. You think you could hold that over the Emperor's head? I wouldn't think of it. The Count smiled. Sardaukar commanders could be found who'd confess they acted without orders because they wanted a battle with your Fremen scum. Many might doubt such a confession, the Baron said, but the threat staggered him. Are Sardaukar truly that disciplined? He wondered. The Emperor does wish to audit your books, the Count said. Any time. You, have no objections? None. My chum company directorship will bear the closest scrutiny. And he thought, let him bring a false accusation against me and have it exposed. I shall stand there, Promethean, saying, Behold me, I am wronged. Then let him bring any other accusation against me, even a true one. The great houses will not believe a second attack from an accuser once proved wrong. No doubt your books will bear the closest scrutiny, the Count muttered. Why is the Emperor so interested in exterminating the Fremen? The Baron asked. You wish the subject to be changed, eh? The Count shrugged. It is the Sardaukar who wish it, not the Emperor. They needed practice in killing, and they hate to see a task left undone. Does he think to frighten me by reminding me that he is supported by bloodthirsty killers? The Baron wondered. A certain amount of killing has always been an arm of business, the Baron said, but a line has to be drawn somewhere. Someone must be left to work on the spice. The Count emitted a short, barking laugh. You think you can harness the Fremen? There never were enough of them for that, the Baron said, but the killing has made the rest of my population uneasy. It's reaching the point where I'm considering another solution to the Arrakeen problem, my dear Fenring, and I must confess the Emperor deserves credit for the inspiration. Ah, you see, Count, I have the Emperor's prison planet, Salusa Secundus, to inspire me. The Count stared at him with glittering intensity. What possible connection is there between Arrakis and Salusa Secundus? The Baron felt the alertness in Fenring's eyes, said, No connection yet. Yet? You must admit it'd be a way to develop a substantial workforce on Arrakis, used the place as a prison planet. You anticipate an increase in prisoners? There's been unrest, the Baron admitted. I've had to squeeze rather severely, Fenring. After all, you know the price I paid that damnable guild to transport our mutual force to Arrakis. That money has to come from somewhere. I suggest you not use Arrakis as a prison planet without the Emperor's permission, Baron. Of course not, the Baron said, and he wondered at the sudden chill in Fenring's voice. Another matter, the Count said. We learned that Duke Leto's mentat Fufahawat is not dead but in your employ. I could not bring myself to waste him, the Baron said. You lied to our Sardaukar commander when you said Hawat was dead. Only a white lie, my dear Count. I hadn't the stomach for a long argument with the man. Was Hawat the real traitor? Oh, goodness, no. It was the false doctor. The Baron wiped at perspiration on his neck. You must understand, Fenring. I was without a mentat. You know that. I've never been without a mentat. It was most unsettling. How could you get Howard to shift allegiance? His duke was dead. The Baron forced a smile. There's nothing to fear from Howard, my dear Count. The mentat's flesh has been impregnated with a latent poison. We administer an antidote in his meals. Without the antidote, the poison is triggered. He'd die in a few days. Withdraw the antidote, the Count said. But he's useful, and he knows too many things no living man should know. You said the Emperor doesn't fear exposure. Don't play games with me, Baron. When I see such an order above the Imperial seal, I'll obey it, the Baron said, but I'll not submit to your whim. You think it whim? What else can it be? The Emperor has obligations to me, too, Fenring. I rid him of the troublesome Duke, the help of a few Sardaukar. Where else would the Emperor have found a house to provide the disguising uniforms to hide his hand in this matter? He has asked himself the same question, Baron, but with a slightly different emphasis. The Baron studied Fenring, noting the stiffness of jaw muscles, the careful control. Ah, now, the Baron said, I hope the Emperor doesn't believe he can move against me in total secrecy. He hopes it won't become necessary. The Emperor cannot believe I threaten him. The Baron permitted anger and grief to edge his voice, thinking, let him wrong me in that. I could place myself on the throne while still beating my breast over how I'd been wronged. The Count's voice went dry and remote as he said, The Emperor believes what his senses tell him. Dared the Emperor charge me with treason before a full Landsraad council? And the Baron held his breath with the hope of it. The Emperor need dare nothing. The Baron whirled away in his suspenses to hide his expression. It could happen in my lifetime, he thought. Emperor, let him wrong me. Then the bribes and coercion, the rallying of the great houses. They'd flock to my banner like peasants running for shelter. The thing they fear above all else is the Emperor's Sardaukar loosed upon them, one house at a time. It's the Emperor's sincere hope he'll never have to charge you with treason, the Count said. The Baron found it difficult to keep irony out of his voice and permit only the expression of hurt, but he managed. I've been a most loyal subject. These words hurt me beyond my capacity to express. Said the Count. The Baron kept his back to the Count, nodding. Presently he said, It's time to go to the arena. Indeed, said the Count. They moved out of the cone of silence and, side by side, walked toward the clumps of houses minor at the edge of the hall. A bell began a slow tolling somewhere in the keep, 20-minute warning for the arena gathering. The houses minor wait for you to lead them, the Count said, nodding toward the people they approached. Double meaning, the Baron thought. He looked up at the new talismans flanking the exit to his hall, the mounted bull's head and the oil painting of the old Duke Atreides, the late Duke Leto's father. They filled the Baron with an odd sense of foreboding, and he wondered what thoughts these talismans had inspired in the Duke Leto as they hung in the halls of Caladan, and then on Arrakis, the bravura father and the head of the bull that had killed him. Mankind is our only one science, the Count said, as they picked up their parade of followers and emerged from the hall into the waiting room, a narrow space with high windows and floor of patterned white and purple tile. And what science is that? The Baron asked. It's the, science of, discontent, the Count said. The house's miner behind them, sheep-faced and responsive, laughed with just the right tone of appreciation, but the sound carried a note of discord as it collided with the sudden blast of motors that came to them when pages threw open the outer doors, revealing the line of ground cars, their guidon pennants whipping in a breeze. The Baron raised his voice to surmount the sudden noise, said, "I hope you'll not be discontented with the performance of my nephew today, Count Fenring. I, am filled, only with a, sense of anticipation, yes," the Count said, "always in the, process verbal. One, must consider the, office of origin." The Baron hid his sudden stiffening of surprise by stumbling on the first step down from the exit. Process verbal. That was a report of a crime against the Imperium, but the Count chuckled to make it seem a joke, and patted the Baron's arm. All the way to the arena, though, the Baron sat back among the armoured cushions of his car, casting covert glances at the Count beside him, wondering why the Emperor's errand boy had thought it necessary to make that particular kind of joke in front of the house's miner. It was obvious that Fenring seldom did anything he felt to be unnecessary, or used two words where one would do, or held himself to a single meaning in a single phrase. They were seated in the golden box above the triangular arena, horns blaring, the tiers above and around them jammed with a hubbub of people and waving pennants, when the answer came to the Baron. "My dear Baron," the Count said, leaning close to his ear, "you know, don't you, that the Emperor has not given official sanction to your choice of heir?" The Baron felt himself to be within a sudden personal cone of silence produced by his own shock. He stared at Fenring, barely seeing the Count's lady come through the guards beyond to join the party in the golden box. "That's really why I'm here today," the Count said. "The Emperor wishes me to report on whether you've chosen a worthy successor. There's nothing like the arena to expose the true person from beneath the mask, eh? The Emperor promised me free choice of heir," the Baron grated. "We shall see," Fenring said, and turned away to greet his lady. She sat down, smiling at the Baron, then giving her attention to the sandfloor beneath them where Fade Ralph was emerging in guiles and tights, the black glove and the long knife in his right hand, and the white glove and the short knife in his left hand. "White for poison, black for purity," the Lady Fenring said. "A curious custom, isn't it, my love?" The Count said. The greeting cheer lifted from the family galleries, and Fade Ralph paused to accept it, looking up and scanning the faces, seeing his cousins and cousins, but dare my brothers, the concubines and out-frain relations. There were so many pink trumpet mouths yammering amidst a flutter of colourful clothing and banners. It came to Fade Ralph then that the packed ranks of faces would look just as avidly at his blood as at that of the slave gladiator. There was not a doubt of the outcome in this fight, of course. Here was only the form of danger without its substance, yet. Fedorfa held up his knives to the sun, saluted the free comers of the arena in the ancient manner. The short knife in white-gloved hand, white, the sign of poison, went first into its sheath. From the long blade in the black-gloved hand, the pure blade that now was unpure, his secret weapon to turn this day into a purely personal victory, poison on the black blade. The adjustment of his body shield took only a moment, and he paused to sense the skin tightening at his forehead, assuring him he was properly guarded. This moment carried its own suspense, and Fade Ralph dragged it out with the sure hand of a showman, nodding to his handlers and distractors, checking their equipment with a measuring stare, gyves in place with their brickles sharp and glistening, the barbs and hooks waving with their blue streamers. Fade Ralph signalled the musicians. The slow march began, sonorous with its ancient pomp, and Fade Ralph led his troop across the arena for obeisance at the foot of his uncle's box. He caught the ceremonial key as it was thrown. The music stopped. Into the abrupt silence he stepped back 2 paces, raised the key and shouted, "I dedicate this truth to," and he paused, knowing his uncle would think, the young fool's going to dedicate to Lady Fenring after all and cause a ruckus. "To my uncle and patron, the Baron Vladimir Harkonnen," Fade Ralph shouted, and he was delighted to see his uncle sigh. The music resumed at the quick march, and Fade Ralph led his men scampering back across the arena to the prudence door that admitted only those wearing the proper identification band. Fade Ralph prided himself that he never used for Prudor and seldom needed distractors, but it was good to know they were available this day. Special plans sometimes involved special dangers. Again, silence settled over the arena. Feyd-Rautha turned, faced the big red door across from him, through which the gladiator would emerge. The special gladiator. The plan Howard had devised was admirably simple and direct, Feyd-Rautha thought. The slave would not be drugged. That was the danger. Instead, a key word had been drummed into the man's unconscious to immobilize his muscles at a critical instant. Feyd-Rautha rolled the vital word in his mind, mouthing it without sound. Scum. To the audience, it would appear that an undrugged slave had been slipped into the arena to kill the Baron. All the carefully arranged evidence would point to the slave master. A low humming arose from the red door's servo motors as they were armed for opening. Feyd-Rautha focused all his awareness on the door. This first moment was the critical one. The appearance of the gladiator as he emerged told the trained eye much it needed to know. All gladiators were supposed to be hyped on their like a drug to come out kill-ready in fighting stance, but you had to watch how they hafted the knife, which way they turned in defense, whether they were actually aware of the audience in the stands. The way a slave cocked his head could give the most vital clue to counter and feint. The red door slammed open. Out charged a tall, muscular man with shaved head and darkly pitted eyes. His skin was carrot-coloured as it should be from the Alaka drug, but Feyd-Rautha knew the colour was paint. The slave wore green leotards and the red belt of a semi-shield. The belt's arrow pointing left to indicate the slave's left side was shielded. He held his knife sword fashion, cocked slightly outward in the stance of a trained fighter. Slowly he advanced into the arena, turning his shielded side toward Feyd-Rautha and the group at the prow door. "I like not the look of this one," said one of Feyd-Rautha's barbmen. "Are you sure he's drugged, my lord?" "Yes, the colour," Feyd-Rautha said. "Yet he stands like a fighter," said another helper. Feyd-Rautha advanced 2 steps onto the sand, studied his slave. "What has he done to his arm?" asked one of the distractors. Feyd-Rautha's attention went to a bloody scratch on the man's left forearm, followed the arm down to the hand as it pointed to a design drawn in blood on the left hip of the green leotards, a wet shape there, the formalized outline of a hawk. Hawk! Feyd-Rautha looked up into the darkly pitted eyes, saw them glaring at him with uncommon alertness. "Son of Duke Leto's fighting men we took on Arrakis," Feyd-Rautha thought. "No simple gladiator this." A chill ran through him, and he wondered if Howard had another plan for this arena, a feint within a feint within a feint, and only the slave master prepared to take the blame. Feyd-Rautha's chief handler spoke at his ear. "I like not the look on that one, my lord. Let me set a barb or 2 in his left arm to try him." "I'll set my own barbs," Feyd-Rautha said. He took a pair of long hooked shafts from the handler, hefted them, testing the balance. These barbs, too, were supposed to be drugged, but not this time, and the chief handler might die because of that. But it was all part of the plan. "You will come out of this a hero," Howard had said. "Killed your gladiator man to man in spite of treachery. The slave master will be executed and your man will step into his spot." Feyd-Rautha advanced another 5 paces into the arena, playing out the moment, studying the slave. Already he knew the experts in the stands above him were aware that something was wrong. The gladiator had the correct skin colour for a drugged man, but he stood his ground and did not tremble. The aficionados would be whispering among themselves now. See how he stands. He should be agitated, attacking or retreating. See how he conserves his strength, how he waits. He should not wait. Feyd-Rautha felt his own excitement kindle. Let there be treachery in Howard's mind, he thought. "I can handle this slave. And it's my long knife that carries the poison this time, not the short one. Even Howard doesn't know that." "Hi, Harkonnen," the slave called. "Are you prepared to die?" Deathly stillness gripped the arena. Slaves did not issue the challenge. Now Feyd-Rautha had a clear view of the gladiator's eyes, saw the cold ferocity of despair in them. He marked the way the man stood, loose and ready, muscles prepared for victory. The slave grapevine had carried Howard's message to this one. He'll get a true chance to kill the Baron. That much of the scheme was as they'd planned it then. A tight smile crossed Feyd-Rautha's mouth. He lifted the barb, seeing success for his plans in the way the gladiator stood. "Hi, hi," the slave challenged, and crept forward 2 steps. No one in the galleries can mistake it now, Feyd-Rautha thought. The slave should have been partly crippled by drug-induced terror. Every movement should have betrayed his inner knowledge that there was no hope for him. He could not win. He should have been filled with the stories of the poisons the Baron chose for the blade in his white-gloved hand. For Baron never gave quick death. He delighted in demonstrating rare poisons, could stand in the arena pointing out interesting side effects on a arriving victim. There was fear in the slave, yes, but not terror. Feyd-Rautha lifted the barbs high, nodded in an almost greeting. The gladiator pounced. His feint and defensive counter were as good as any Feyd-Rautha had ever seen. A timed side blow missed by the barest fraction from severing the tendons of the Baron's left leg. Feyd-Rautha danced away, leaving a barbed shaft in the slave's right forearm. the hooks completely buried in flesh where the man could not withdraw them without ripping tendons. A concerted gasp lifted from the galleries. The sound filled Fred Ralph with elation. He knew now what his uncle was experiencing. Sitting up there with the Fenrings, the observers from the Imperial Court beside him, there could be no interference with this fight. The forms must be observed in front of witness, and the Baron would interpret the events in the arena only one way, Fred to himself. The slave backed, holding knife in teeth and lashing the barbed shaft to his arm with the pennant. "I do not feel your needle," he shouted. Again he crept forward, knife ready, left side presented, the body bent backward to give it the greatest surface of protection from the half-shield. That action, too, didn't escape the galleries. Sharp cries came from the family boxes. Fred Ralph's handlers were calling out to ask if he needed them. He waved them back to the Prudor. "I'll give them a show such as they've never had before," Fred Ralph thought. "No tame killing where they can sit back and admire the style. Those will be something to take them by the guts and twist them. When I'm Baron, they'll remember this day and won't be one of them can escape fear of me because of this day." Fred Ralph gave ground slowly before the gladiator's crab-like advance. Arena sand grated underfoot. He heard the slaves panting, smelled his own sweat and a faint odour of blood on the air. Steadily the Baron moved backward, turning to the right, his second barb ready. The slave danced sideways. Fred Ralph appeared to stumble, heard the scream from the galleries. Again the slaves pounced. Gods, what a fighting man, Fred Ralph thought as he leaped aside. Only youth's quickness saved him, but he left the second barb buried in the deltoid muscle of the slave's right arm. Shrill cheers rained from the galleries. They'd cheer me now, Fred Ralph thought. He heard the wildness in the voices just as Howard had said he would. They'd never cheered a family fighter that way before. And he thought with an edge of grimness on a thing Howard had told him. It's easy to be terrified by an enemy you admire. Swiftly, Fred Ralph retreated to the centre of the arena where all he could see clearly. He drew his long blade, crouched and waited for the advancing slave. The man took only the time to lash the second barb tight to his arm, then sped in pursuit. Let the family see me do this thing, Fred Ralph thought. I am their enemy. Let them think of me as they see me now. He drew the short blade. I do not fear you, Harkonnen swine, the gladiator said. Your torches cannot hurt a dead man. I can be dead on my own blade before a handler lays fingers to my flesh, and I'll have you dead beside me. Fred Ralph grinned, offered now the long blade, the one with the poison. Try this one, he said, and feinted with the short blade in his other hand. The slave shifted knife hands, turned inside both parry and feint to grapple the Baron's short blade, the one in the white-gloved hand that tradition said should carry the poison. You will die, Harkonnen, the gladiator gasped. They struggled sideways across the sand. Where Fred Ralph's shield met the slave's half-shield, a blue glow marked the contact, the air around them filled with ozone from the fields. Die on your own poison, the slave grated. He began forcing the white-gloved hand inward, turning the blade he thought carried the poison. Let them see this, Fred Ralph thought. He brought down the long blade, felt it clang uselessly against the barbed shaft lashed to the slave's arm. Fred Ralph felt a moment of desperation. He had not thought the barbed shafts would be an advantage for the slave, but they gave the man another shield. In the strength of this gladiator, the short blade was being forced inward inexorably, and Fred Ralph focused on the fact that a man could also die on an unpoisoned blade. Scum, Fred Ralph gasped. At the key word, the gladiator's muscles obeyed with a momentary slackness. It was enough for Fred Ralph. He opened a space between them sufficient for the long blade. Its poisoned tip flicked out, drew a red line down the slave's chest. There was instant agony in the poison. The man disengaged himself, staggered backward. Now let my dear family watch, Fred Ralph thought. Let them think on this slave who tried to turn the knife he thought poisoned and used it against me. Let them wonder how a gladiator could come into this arena ready for such an attempt. Let them always be aware they cannot know for sure which of my hands carries the poison. Fred Ralph stood in silence, watching the slowed motions of the slave. The man moved with a hesitation awareness. There was an orthographic thing on his face now for every watcher to recognize, for death was written there. The slave knew it had been done to him, and he knew how it had been done. The wrong blade had carried the poison. You, the man moaned. Fred Ralph drew back to give death its space. The paralyzing drug and the poison had yet to take full effect, but the man's slowness told of its advance. The slave staggered forward as though drawn by a string, one dragging step at a time. Each step was the only step in his universe. He still clutched his knife, but its point wavered. One day, one of us will get you, he gasped. A sad little narrow contorted his mouth. He sagged, and stiffened and rolled away from Fred Ralph, face down. Fedrafa advanced in the silent arena, put a toe under the gladiator and rolled him onto his back to give the galleries a clear view of the face when the poison began its twisting, wrenching work on the muscles. But the gladiator came over with his own knife protruding from his breast. In spite of the frustration, there was for Fedrafa a measure of admiration for the effort this slave had managed in overcoming the paralysis to do this thing to himself. With the admiration came the realization that here was truly a thing to fear. That which makes a man superhuman is terrifying. As he focused on this thought, Fedrafa became conscious of the eruption of noise from the stands and galleries around him. They were cheering with utter abandon. Fedrafa turned, looking up at them. All were cheering except the Baron, who sat with hand to chin in deep contemplation, and the Count and his lady, both of whom were staring down at him, their faces masked by smiles. Count Fenring turned to his lady and said, "Ah, my resourceful, young man. Hey, my dear." "His, synaptic responses are very swift," she said. The Baron looked at her, at the Count, returned his attention to the arena. If someone could get that close to one of mine, rage began to replace his fear. I'll have the slave master dead over a slow fire this night, and if his Count and his lady had a hand in it. The conversation in the Baron's box was remote movement to Fedrafa, the voices drowned in the foot-stamping chant that came now from all around. Head, 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 head. The Baron scowled, seeing the way Fedrafa turned to him. Languidly, controlling his rage with difficulty, the Baron waved his hand toward the young man standing in the arena beside the sprawled body of the slave. Give the boy a head. He earned it by exposing the slave master. Fedrafa saw the signal of agreement, thought, they think they honor me. Let them see what I think. He saw his handlers approaching with a saw knife to do the honors, waved them back, repeated the gesture as they hesitated. They think they honor me with just a head, he thought. He bent and crossed the gladiator's hands around the protruding knife handle, then removed the knife and placed it in the limp hands. It was done in an instant, and he straightened, beckoned his handlers. Bury the slave intact with his knife in his hands, he said. The man earned it. In the golden box, Count Fenring leaned close to the Baron and said, "A grand gesture, that. True bravura. Your nephew has style as well as courage." "He insults the crowd by refusing the head," the Baron muttered. "Not at all," Lady Fenring said. She turned, looking up at the tiers around them, and the Baron noted the line of her neck, a truly lovely flowing of muscles. Lucky young boys. "They like what your nephew did," she said. As the import of Fedrafa's gesture penetrated to the most distant seats, as the people saw the handlers carrying off the dead gladiator intact, the Baron watched them and realized she had interpreted the reaction correctly. The people were going wild, beating on each other, screaming and stamping. The Baron spoke wearily. "I shall have to order a fate. You cannot send people home like this, their energies unspent. They must see that I share their elation." He gave a hand signal to the guard, and a servant above them dipped the Harkonnen orange pennant over the box. Once, twice, 3 times. Signal for a fate. Fedrafa crossed the arena to stand beneath the golden box, his weapons sheathed, arms hanging at his sides. Above the undiminished frenzy of the crowd, he called, "A fate, uncle?" The noise began to subside as people saw the conversation and waited. "In your honor, Fade," the Baron called down, and again he caused the pennant to be dipped in signal. Across the arena, the Prue barriers had been dropped, and young men were leaping down into the arena, racing toward Fedrafa. "You ordered the Prue shields dropped, Baron?" the Count asked. "No one will harm the lad," the Baron said. "He's a hero." The first of the charging mass reached Fedrafa, lifted him on their shoulders, began parading around the arena. He could walk unarmed and unshielded through the poorest quarters of Harko tonight, the Baron said. They'd give him the last of their food and drink just for his company. The Baron pushed himself from his chair, settled his weight into his suspensors. "You will forgive me, please. There are matters that require my immediate attention. The guard will see you to the keep." The Count arose, bowed. "Certainly, Baron. We're looking forward to the fate." "I, never seen a Harkonnen fate." "Yes," the Baron said. "The fate." He turned, was enveloped by guards as he stepped into the private exit from the box. A guard captain bowed to Count Fenring. "Your orders, my lord." "We will, wait for the worst, crush to, pass," the Count said. "Yes, my lord." The man bowed himself back 3 paces. Count Fenring faced his lady, spoke again in their personal humming code tongue. "You saw it, of course?" In the same humming tongue, she said, "The lad knew the gladiator wouldn't be drugged. There was a moment of fear, yes, but no surprise. It was planned," he said. "The entire performance, without a doubt. It stinks of Hawat." "Indeed," she said. "I demanded earlier that the Baron eliminate Hawat. That was an error, my dear. I see that now. The Harkonnens may have a new Baron ere long, if that's how it's planned. That will bear examination, true, she said. The young one will be more amenable to control, for us, after tonight, she said. You don't anticipate difficulty seducing him, my little brood mother? No, my love. You saw how he looked at me. Yes, and I can see now why we must have that bloodline. Indeed, and it's obvious we must have a hold on him. I'll plant deep in his deepest self the necessary prana bindu phrases to bend him. We'll leave as soon as possible, as soon as you're sure, he said. She shuddered. By all means, I should not want to bear a child in this terrible place. The things we do in the name of humanity, he said. Yours is the easy part, she said. There are some ancient prejudices I overcome, he said. They're quite primordial, you know. My poor dear, she said, and patted his cheek. You know this is the only way to be sure of saving that bloodline. He spoke in a dry voice. I quite understand what we do. We won't fail, she said. Guilt starts as a feeling of failure, he reminded. There'll be no guilt, she said. Hypno-ligation of that Phaedrartha's psyche and his child in my womb. Then we go. That uncle, he said. Have you ever seen such distortion? He's pretty fierce, she said, but the nephew could well grow to be worse, thanks to that uncle. You know, when you think what this lad could have been with some other upbringing, with the Atreides code to guide him, for example. It's sad, she said. Would that we could have saved both the Atreides youth and this one. From what I heard of that young Paul, a most admirable lad, good union of breeding and training. He shook his head. But we shouldn't waste sorrow over the aristocracy of misfortune. There's a Bene Gesserit saying, she said. You have sayings for everything, he protested. You'll like this one, she said. It goes, do not count a human dead until you've seen his body, and even then you can make a mistake. Muad'Dib tells us in A Time of Reflection that his first collisions with Arrakeen necessities were the true beginnings of his education. He learned then how to pole the sand for its weather, learned the language of the wind's needle stinging his skin, learned how the nose can buzz with sand itch and how to gather his body's precious moisture around him, to guard it and preserve it. And his eyes assumed the blue of the Ibad. He learned the Chekhov's way. Stilgar's preface to Muad'Dib, the Man, by the Princess Irulan. Stilgar's troop, returning to the siege with its two strays from the desert, climbed out of the basin in the waning light of the first moon. The robed figures hurried with the smell of home in their nostrils. Dawn's grey line behind them was brightest at the notch in their horizon calendar that marked the middle of autumn, the month of Caprock. Wind-raked dead leaves strewed the cliff base where the siege children had been gathering them, but the sounds of the troops' passage, except for the occasional blunderings by Paul and his mother, could not be distinguished from the natural sounds of the night. Paul wiped sweat-caked dust from his forehead, felt a tug at his arm, heard Chani's voice hissing, "Do as I told you. Bring the fold of your hood down on over your forehead. Leave only the eyes exposed. You waste moisture." A whispered command behind them demanded silence. "The desert hears you." A bird chirruped from the rocks high above them. The troop stopped, and Paul sensed abrupt tension. There came a faint thumping from the rocks, a sound no louder than mice jumping in the sand. Again the bird chirruped. A stir passed through the troop's ranks, and again the mouse thumping pecked its way across the sand. Once more the bird chirruped. The troop resumed its climb up into a crack in the rocks, but there was a stillness of breath about the Fremen now that filled Paul with caution, and he noted covert glances toward Chani, the way she seemed to withdraw, pulling in upon herself. There was rock underfoot now, a faint grey swishing of robes around them, and Paul sensed a relaxing of discipline, but still the quiet of the person about Chani and the others. He followed a shadow shape, up steps, a turn, more steps, into a tunnel, past two moisture-sealed doors and into a globe-lighted narrow passage of yellow rock walls and ceiling. All around him, Paul saw the Fremen throwing back their hoods, removing nose plugs, breathing deeply. Someone sighed. Paul looked for Chani, found that she had left his side. He was hemmed in by a press of robed bodies. Someone jostled him, said, "Excuse me, Yusul. What a crush. It's always this way." On his left, the narrow-bearded face of the one called Farok turned toward Paul. The stained eye-pits and blue darkness of eyes appeared even darker under the yellow globes. "Throw off your hood, Yusul," Farok said. "You're home." And he helped Paul, releasing the hood catch, allowing an elbowing space around them. Paul slipped out the nose plugs, swung the mouth baffle aside. The odor of the place assailed him. Unwashed bodies, distillate ethers of reclaimed wastes, everywhere on the sour effluvia of humanity, with, over it all, a turbulence of spike and spice-like harmonics. "Why are we waiting, Farok?" Paul asked. "For the Reverend Mother, I think. You heard the message." Poor Chani. Poor Chani, Paul asked himself. He looked around, wondering where she was, where his mother had got to in all this crush. Farok took a deep breath. "The smells of home," he said. Paul saw that the man was enjoying the stink of this air, but there was no irony in his tone. He heard his mother cough then, and her voice came back to him through the press of the troop. "How rich the odours of your siege, Stilgar. I see you do much working with the spice. You make paper, plastics, and isn't that chemical explosives? You know this from what you smell? It was another man's voice, and Paul realized she was speaking for his benefit, that she wanted him to make a quick acceptance of this assault on his nostrils. There came a buzz of activity at the head of the troop and a prolonged indrawn breath that seemed to pass through the Fremen, and Paul heard hushed voices back down the line. It's true then. Liet is dead. Liet, Paul thought. Then, Chani, daughter of Liet. The pieces fell together in his mind. Liet was the Fremen name of the planetologist. Paul looked at Farok, asked, Is it the Liet known as Kynes? There is only one Liet, Farok said. Paul turned, stared at the robed back of a Fremen in front of him. Then Liet Kynes is dead, he thought. It was Harkonnen treachery, someone hissed. They made it seem an accident, lost in the desert, a thopter crash. Paul felt a burst of anger. The man who had befriended them, helped save them from the Harkonnen hunters, the man who had sent his Fremen cohort searching for 2 strays in the desert, another victim of the Harkonnens. Does Usul hunger for revenge? Farok said. Before Paul could answer, there came a low call and the troop swept forward into a wider chamber, carrying Paul with them. He found himself in an open space confronted by Stilgar and a strange woman, wearing a flowing wraparound garment of brilliant orange and green. Her arms were bare to the shoulders, and you could see she wore no steel suit. Her skin was a pale olive. Dark hair swept back from her high forehead, throwing emphasis on sharp cheekbones and aquiline nose between the dense darkness of her eyes. She turned toward him, and Paul saw golden rings threaded with water tallies dangling from her ears. This bested my Jamis? She demanded. Be silent, Hara, Stilgar said. It was Jamis' doing. He invoked Vetahadi al-Burhan. He's not but a boy, she said. She gave her head a sharp shake from side to side, setting the water tallies to jiggling. My children made fatherless by another child? Surely 'twas an accident. Usul, how many years have you? Stilgar asked. 15 standard, Paul said. Stilgar swept his eyes over the troop. Is there one among you cares to challenge me? Silence. Stilgar looked at the woman. Till I've learned his weeding ways, I'd not challenge him. She returned his stare. But, you saw the stranger woman who went with Chani to the Reverend Mother? Stilgar asked. She's an Outfrain Sayadina, mother to this land. The mother and son are masters of the weeding ways of battle. Listen, Al-Gaib, the woman whispered. Her eyes held awe as she turned them back toward Paul. The legend again, Paul thought. Perhaps, Stilgar said. It hasn't been tested, though. He returned his attention to Paul. Usul, it's our way that you've now the responsibility for Jamis' woman here and for his 2 sons. His yali, his quarters, are yours. His coffee service is yours. And this, his woman. Paul studied the woman, wondering, why isn't she mourning her man? Why does she show no hate for me? Abruptly, he saw that the Fremen were staring at him, waiting. Someone whispered, There's work to do. Say how you accept her. Stilgar said, Do you accept Hara as woman or servant? Hara lifted her arms, turning slowly on one heel. I am still young, Usul. It's said that I still look as young as when I was with Jeff, before Jamis bested him. Jamis killed another to win her, Paul thought. Paul said, If I accept her as servant, may I yet change my mind at a later time? You'd have a year to change your decision, Stilgar said. After that, she's a free woman to choose as she wishes, or you could free her to choose for herself at any time. But she's your responsibility, no matter what, for 1 year, and you'll always share some responsibility for the sons of Jamis. I accept her as servant, Paul said. Hara stamped a foot, shook her shoulders with anger. But I'm young. Stilgar looked at Paul, said, Caution's a worthy trait in a man who'd lead. But I'm young, Hara repeated. Be silent, Stilgar commanded. If a thing has merit, it'll be. Show Usul to his quarters, and see he has fresh clothing and a place to rest. Oh, she said. Paul had registered enough of her to have a first approximation. He felt the impatience of the troop, knew many things were being delayed here. He wondered if he dared ask the whereabouts of his mother and Chani, saw from Stilgar's nervous stance that it would be a mistake. He faced Hara, pitched his voice of tone and tremolo to accent her fear and awe, said, Show me my quarters, Hara. We will discuss your youth another time. She backed away 2 steps, cast a frightened glance at Stilgar. He has the weirding way. He has the weirding voice, she husked. Stilgar, Paul said. Chani's father put heavy obligation on me. If there's anything, it'll be decided in council, Stilgar said. You can speak then. He nodded in dismissal, turned away with the rest of the troop following him. Paul took Hara's arm, noting how cool her flesh seemed, feeling her tremble. I'll not harm you, Hara, he said. Show me our quarters, and he smoothed his voice with relaxance. You'll not cast me out when the year's gone, she said. I know for true I'm not as young as once I was. As long as I live, you'll have a place with me, he said. He released her arm. Come now, where are our quarters? She turned, led the way down the passage, turning right into a wide cross tunnel lighted by evenly spaced, yellow overhead globes. The stone floor was smooth, swept clean of sand. Paul moved up beside her, studied the aquiline profile as they walked. You do not hate me, Hara? Why should I hate you? She nodded to a cluster of children who stared at them from the raised ledge of a side passage. Paul glimpsed adult shapes behind the children, partly hidden by filmy hangings. I bested Jamis. Stilgar said the ceremony was held and you're a friend of Jamis. She glanced sidelong at him. Stilgar said you gave moisture to the dead. Is that truth? Yes. It's more than I'll do. Can do. Don't you mourn him? In the time of mourning, I'll mourn him. They passed an arched opening. Paul looked through it at men and women working with stand-mounted machinery in a large bright chamber. There seemed an extra tempo of urgency to them. What are they doing in there? Paul asked. She glanced back as they passed beyond the arch, said, They hurry to finish the quota in the plastics shop before we flee. We need many dew collectors for the planting. Flee? Until the butchers stop hunting us or are driven from our land. Paul caught himself in a stumble, sensing an arrested instant of time, remembering a fragment, a visual projection of prescience, but it was displaced, like a montage in motion. The bits of his prescient memory were not quite as he remembered them. The Sardaukar hunt us, he said. They'll not find much expecting an empty siege or two, she said, and they'll find their share of death in the sand. They'll find this place? He asked. Likely. Yet we take the time to... He motioned with his head toward the arch now far behind them. Make dew collectors? The planting goes on. What are dew collectors? He asked. The glance she turned on him was full of surprise. Don't they teach you anything in the... wherever it is you come from? Not about dew collectors. Hi, she said. There was a whole conversation in the one word. Well, what are they? Each bush, each weed you see out there is the erg. In the erg, she said. How do you suppose it lives when we leave it? Each is planted most tenderly in its own little pit. The pits are filled with smooth ovals of chromoplastic. Light turns them white. You can see them glistening in the dawn if you look down from a high place. White reflects, but when old Father Sun departs, the chromoplastic reverts to transparency in the dark. It cools with extreme rapidity. The surface condenses moisture out of the air. That moisture trickles down to keep our plants alive. Dew collectors, he muttered, enchanted by the simple beauty of such a scheme. I'll mourn Jamis in the proper time for it, she said, as though her mind had not left the question. He was a good man, Jamis, but quick to anger, a good provider, Jamis, and a wonder with the children. He made no separation between Jeff's boy, my firstborn, and his own true son. They were equal in his eyes. She turned a questioning stare on Paul. Would it be that way with you, Yusul? We don't have that problem. But if... Hara. She recoiled at the harsh edge in his voice. They passed another brightly lighted room visible through an arch on their left. What's made there? He asked. They repair the weaving machinery, she said, but it must be dismantled by tonight. She gestured at a tunnel branching to their left. Through there and beyond, there's food processing and still suit maintenance. She looked at Paul. Your suit looks new, but if it needs work, I'm good with suits. I work in the factory in season. They began coming on knots of people now and figured clusterings of openings in the tunnel's sides. A file of men and women passed them carrying packs that gurgled heavily, the smell of spice strong about them. They'll not get our water, Hara said, or our spice. You can be sure of that. Paul glanced at the openings in the tunnel walls, seeing the heavy carpets on the raised ledges, glimpses of rooms with bright fabrics on the walls, piled cushions. People in the openings fell silent at their approach, followed Paul with untamed stares. The people find it strange you bested Jamis, Hara said. Likely we'll have some proving to do when we're settled in a new siege. I don't like killing, he said. Thus Stilgar tells it, she said, but her voice betrayed her disbelief. A shrill chanting grew louder ahead of them. They came to another side opening wider than any of the others Paul had seen. He showed his place, staring in at a room crowded with children sitting cross-legged on a maroon-carpeted floor. At a chalkboard against the far wall stood a woman in a yellow wraparound, a projecto stylus in one hand. The board was filled with designs. Circles, wedges and curves, snake tracks and squares, flowing arcs split between parallel lines. The woman pointed to the designs one after the other as fast as she could move the stylus, and the children chanted in rhythm with her moving hand. Paul listened, hearing the voices grow dimmer behind as he moved deeper into the siege with Hara. Tree, the children chanted. Tree, grass, dune, wind, mountain, hill, fire, lightning, rock, rocks, dust, sand, heat, shelter, heat, full, winter, cold, empty, erosion, summer, cavern, day, tension, moon, night, caprock, sand-tide slope, planting, binder. You conduct classes at a time like this? Paul asked. Her face went sombre and grief edged her voice. What Leah taught us, we cannot pause an instant in that. Leah, who is dead, must not be forgotten. It's the Chekhov's way. She crossed the tunnel to the left, stepped up onto a ledge, perted gauzy orange hangings and stood aside. Your Yali is ready for you, Yusul. Paul hesitated before joining her on the ledge. He felt a sudden reluctance to be alone with this woman. It came to him that he was surrounded by a way of life that could only be understood by postulating an ecology of ideas and values. He felt that this Fremen world was fishing for him, trying to snare him in its ways, and he knew what lay in that snare: the wild jihad, the religious war he felt he should avoid at any cost. "This is your Yali," Hara said. "Why do you hesitate?" Paul nodded, joined her on the ledge. He lifted the hangings across from her, feeling metal fibers in the fabric, followed her into a short entranceway and then into a larger room, square, about 6 meters to a side, thick blue carpets on the floor, blue and green fabrics hiding the rock walls, glow globes turned to yellow overhead, bobbing against draped, yellow ceiling fabrics. The effect was that of an ancient tent. Hara stood in front of him, left hand on hip, her eyes studying his face. "The children are with a friend," she said. "They will present themselves later." Paul masked his unease beneath a quick scanning of the room. Thin hangings to the right, he saw partly concealed a larger room with cushions piled around the walls. He felt a soft breeze from an air duct, saw the outlet cunningly hidden in a pattern of hangings directly ahead of him. "Do you wish me to help you remove your stillsuit?" Hara asked. "No, thank you. Shall I bring food?" "Yes. There is a reclamation chamber off the other room," she gestured, "for your comfort and convenience when you're out of your stillsuit." "You said we have to leave the siege," Paul said. "Shouldn't we be packing or something?" "It will be done in its time," she said. "The butchers have yet to penetrate to our region." Still she hesitated, staring at him. "What is it?" he demanded. "You've not the eyes of the Ibad," she said. "It's strange but not entirely unattractive." "Get the food," he said. "I'm hungry." She smiled at him, a knowing woman's smile that he found disquieting. "I am your servant," she said, rolled away in one live motion, ducking behind a heavy wall hanging that revealed another narrow passage before falling back into place. Feeling angry with himself, Paul rushed through the thin hanging on the right and into the larger room. He stood there a moment, caught by uncertainty, and he wondered where Chani was. Chani, who had just lost her father. We're alike in that, he thought. A wailing cry sounded from the outer corridors, its volume muffled by the intervening hangings. It was repeated, a bit more distant, and again Paul realized someone was calling the time. He focused on the fact that he had seen no clocks. The faint smell of burning creosote bush came to his nostrils, riding on the omnipresent stink of the siege. Paul saw that he had already suppressed the odorous assault on his senses, and he wondered again about his mother, how the moving montage of the future would incorporate her, and the daughter she bore. Mutable time awareness danced around him. He shook his head sharply, focusing his attention on the evidences that spoke of profound depth and breadth in this Fremen culture that had swallowed them with its subtle oddities. He had seen a thing about the caverns in this room, a thing that suggested far greater difference than anything he had yet encountered. There was no sign of a poisoned snooper here, no indication of their use anywhere in the cave warren, yet he could smell poisons in the siege stench, strong ones, common ones. He heard a rustle of hangings, thought it was Hara returning with food, and turned to watch her. Instead, from beneath a displaced pattern of hangings, he saw 2 young boys, perhaps aged 9 and 10, staring out at him with greedy eyes. Each wore a small Kinjal-type cries knife, rested a hand on the hilt. And Paul recalled the stories of the Fremen, but their children fought as ferociously as the adults. The hands move, the lips move. Ideas gush from his words, and his eyes devour. He is an island of selfdom. Description from a manual of Muad'Dib by the Princess Irulan. Phosphor tubes in the faraway upper reaches of the cavern cast a dim light onto the thronged interior, hinting at the great size of this rock-enclosed space. Larger, Jessica saw, than even the gathering hall of a Bene Gesserit school. She estimated there were more than 5,000 people gathered out there beneath the ledge where she stood with Stilgar. And more were coming. The air was murmurous with people. "Your son has been summoned from his west, Sayadina," Stilgar said. "Do you wish him to share in your decision?" "Could he change my decision?" "Certainly. The air with which you speak comes from your own lungs, but the decision stands," she said. But she felt misgivings, wondering if she should use Paul as an excuse for backing out of a dangerous course. There was an unborn daughter to think of as well. What endangered the flesh of the mother endangered the flesh of the daughter. Men came with rolled carpets, grunting under the weight of them, stirring up dust as the loads were dropped onto the ledge. Stilgar took her arm, led her back into the acoustical horn that formed the rear limits of the ledge. He indicated a rock bench within the horn. "The Reverend Mother will sit here, but you may rest yourself until she comes." "I prefer to stand," Jessica said. She watched the men unroll the carpets, covering the ledge, looked out at the crowd. There were at least 10,000 people on the rock floor now. And still they came. Out on the desert, she knew, it already was red nightfall, but here in the cavern hall was perpetual twilight, a grey vastness thronged with people come to see her risk her life. A way was opened through the crowd to her right, and she saw Paul approaching, flanked by two small boys. There was a swaggering air of self-importance about the children. They kept hands on knives, scowled at the wall of people on either side. The sons of Jamis, who are now the sons of Usul, Stilgar said. They take their escort duty seriously. He ventured a smile at Jessica. Jessica recognized the effort to lighten her mood and was grateful for it, but could not take her mind from the danger that confronted her. I had no choice but to do this, she thought. We must move swiftly if we have to secure our place among these Fremen. Paul climbed to the ledge, leaving the children below. He stopped in front of his mother, glanced at Stilgar, back to Jessica. What is happening? I thought I was being summoned to council. Stilgar raised a hand for silence, gestured to his left, where another way had been opened in the throng. Chani came down the lane opened there, her elfin face set in lines of grief. She had removed her stillsuit and wore a graceful blue wraparound that exposed her thin arms. Near the shoulder on her left arm, a green kerchief had been tied. Green for mourning, Paul thought. It was one of the customs the two sons of Jamis had explained to him by indirection, telling him they wore no green because they accepted him as guardian father. Are you Valissa Al-Gaib? They had asked, and Paul had sensed the jihad in their words, shrugged off the question of one of his own, learning then that Caliph, the elder of the two, was 10 and the natural son of Jeff. Orlop, the younger, was 8, the natural son of Jamis. It had been a strange day with these two standing guard over him because he asked it, keeping away the curious, allowing him the time to nurse his thoughts and prescient memories, to plan a way to prevent the jihad. Now, standing beside his mother on the cavern ledge and looking out at the throng, he wondered if any plan could prevent the wild outpouring of fanatic legions. Chani, nearing the ledge, was followed at a distance by 4 women carrying another woman in a litter. Jessica ignored Chani's approach, focusing all her attention on the woman in the litter, a crone, a wrinkled and shriveled ancient thing in a black gown with hood thrown back to reveal the tight knot of grey hair and the stringy neck. The litter carriers deposited their burden gently on the ledge from below, and Chani helped the old woman to her feet. So this is their reverend mother, Jessica thought. The old woman leaned heavily on Chani as she hobbled toward Jessica, looking like a collection of sticks draped in the black robe. She stopped in front of Jessica, peered upward for a long moment before speaking in a husky whisper. So you're the one. The old head nodded precariously on the thin neck. The shout-out Mapes is right to pity you. Jessica spoke quickly, scornfully. I need no one's pity. That remains to be seen, husked the old woman. She turned with surprising quickness and faced her throng. Tell them, Stilgar. Must I? He asked. We are the people of Misa, the old woman rasped. Since our Sunni ancestors fled from Nilotic al-Ruba, we have known flight and death. The young go on that our people shall not die. Stilgar took a deep breath, stepped forward 2 paces. Jessica felt the hush come over the crowded cavern. Some 20,000 people now, standing silently, almost without movement. It made her feel suddenly small and filled with caution. Tonight we must leave this siege that has sheltered us for so long and go south into the desert, Stilgar said. His voice boomed out across the uplifted faces, reverberating with the force given it by the acoustical horn behind the ledge. Still the throng remained silent. The Reverend Mother tells me she cannot survive another Hajra, Stilgar said. We have lived before without a Reverend Mother, but it is not good for people to seek a new home in such straits. Now the throng stirred, rippling with whispers and currents of disquiet. But this may not come to pass, Stilgar said. Our new Sayadina, Jessica of the Weirding, has consented to enter the rite at this time. She will attempt to pass within that we not lose the strength of our Reverend Mother. Jessica of the Weirding, Jessica thought. She saw Paul staring at her, his eyes filled with questions, but his mouth held silent by all the strangeness around them. If I die in the attempt, what will become of him? Jessica asked herself. Again she felt the misgivings fill her mind. Chani led the old Reverend Mother to a rock bench deep in the acoustical horn, returned to stand beside Stilgar. That we may not lose all if Jessica of the Weirding should fail, Stilgar said. Chani, daughter of Liet, will be consecrated in the Sayadina at this time. He stepped 1 pace to the side. From deep in the acoustical horn, the old woman's voice came out to them, an amplified whisper, harsh and penetrating. Chani has returned from her Hajra. Chani has seen the waters. A susurrant response arose from the crowd. She has seen the waters. I consecrate the daughter of Liet in the Sayadina, husked the old woman. She is accepted, the crowd responded. Paul barely heard the ceremony, his attention still centered on what had been said of his mother. If she should fail? He turned and looked back at the one they called Reverend Mother, studying the dried crone features, the fathomless blue fixation of her eyes. She looked as though a breeze would blow her away, yet there was that about her which suggested she might stand untouched in the path of a Coriolis storm. She carried the same aura of power that he remembered from the Reverend Mother Hakias Helen Mahayim, who had tested him with agony in the way of the Gom Jabbar. I, the Reverend Mother Ramallo, whose voice speaks as a multitude, say this to you, the old woman said. It is fitting Chani entered the Sayadina. It is fitting, the crowd responded. The old woman nodded, whispered, I give her the silver skies, the golden desert and its shining rocks, the green fields that will be. I will give these to Sayadina Chani, and lest she forget that she is servant of us all, to her fall the menial tasks in this ceremony of the seed. Let it be as Shai Hulud will have it. She lifted a brown stick arm, dropped it. Jessica, feeling the ceremony close around her with a current that swept her beyond all turning back, glanced once at Paul's question-filled face, then prepared herself for the ordeal. Let the Watermasters come forward, Chani said with only the slightest quaver of uncertainty in her girl-child voice. Now Jessica felt herself at the focus of danger, knowing its presence in the watchfulness of the throng, in the silence. A band of men made its way through. A serpentine path opened in the crowd, moving up from the back in pairs. Each pair carried a small skin sack, perhaps twice the size of a human head. The sacks sloshed heavily. The two leaders deposited their load at Chani's feet on the ledge and stepped back. Jessica looked at the sack, then at the men. They had their hoods thrown back, exposing long hair tied in a roll at the base of the neck. The black pits of their eyes stared back at her without wavering. A furry redolence of cinnamon arose from the sack, wafted across Jessica. The spice? She wondered. Is there water? Chani asked. The watermaster on the left, a man with a purple scarline across the bridge of his nose, nodded once. There is water, Sayadina, he said, but we cannot drink of it. Is there seed? Chani asked. There is seed, the man said. Chani knelt and put her hands to the sloshing sack. Blessed is the water and its seed. There was familiarity to the right, and Jessica looked back at the Reverend Mother Ramallo. The old woman's eyes were closed, and she sat hunched over as though asleep. Sayadina Jessica, Chani said. Jessica turned to see the girl staring up at her. Have you tasted the blessed water? Chani asked. Before Jessica could answer, Chani said, It is not possible that you have tested the blessed water. You are outworlder and unprivileged. A sigh passed through the crowd, a susurration of robes that made the nape hairs creep on Jessica's neck. The crop was large and the maker has been destroyed, Chani said. She began unfastening a coiled spout fixed to the top of the sloshing sack. Now Jessica felt the sense of danger boiling around her. She glanced at Paul, saw that he was caught up in the mystery of the ritual and had eyes only for Chani. Has he seen this moment in time? Jessica wondered. She rested her hand on her abdomen, thinking of the unborn daughter there, asking herself, Do I have the right to risk us both? Chani lifted the spout toward Jessica, said, Here is the water of life, the water that is greater than water. Can the water that frees the soul. If you be a Reverend Mother, it opens the universe to you. Let Shai Hulud judge now. Jessica felt herself torn between duty to her unborn child and duty to Paul. For Paul she knew she would take that spout and drink of the sack's contents, but as she bent to the proffered spout, her senses told her its peril. The stuff in the sack had a bitter smell, subtly akin to many poisons that she knew, but unlike them, too. You must drink it now, Chani said. There's no turning back, Jessica reminded herself, but nothing in all her B'nai Gesserit training came into her mind to help her through this instant. What is it? Jessica asked herself. Liquor? A drug? She bent over the spout, smelled the esphers of cinnamon, remembering them, then the drunkenness of Duncan, Idaho. Spice liquor? She asked herself. She took the siphon tube in her mouth, pulled up only the most minuscule sip. It tasted of the spice, a faint bite acrid on the tongue. Chani pressed down on the skin bag. A great gulp of the stuff surged into Jessica's mouth, and before she could help herself, she swallowed it, fighting to retain her calmness and dignity. To accept a little death is worse than death itself, Chani said. She stared at Jessica, waiting, and Jessica stared back, still holding the spout in her mouth. She tasted the sack's contents in her nostrils, in the roof of her mouth, in her cheeks, in her eyes. A biting sweetness now. Cool. Again, Chani sent the liquid gushing into Jessica's mouth. Delicate. Jessica studied Chani's face, elfin features, seeing the traces of Liat kinds there as yet unfixed by time. This is a drug they feed me, Jessica told herself. But it was unlike any other drug of her experience, and B'nai Gesserit training included the taste of many drugs. Chani's features were so clear, as though outlined in light. A drug. Whirling silence settled around Jessica. Every fibre of her body accepted the fact that something profound had happened to it. She felt that she was a conscious mote, smaller than any subatomic particle, yet capable of motion and of sensing her surroundings. Like an abrupt revelation, the curtains whipped away. She realized she had become aware of a psychokinetic extension of herself. She was the mote, yet not the mote. The cavern remained around her. The people. She sensed them. Paul, Chani, Stilgar, the Reverend Mother Ramallo. Reverend Mother. At the school there had been rumours that some did not survive the Reverend Mother ordeal, but the drug took them. Jessica focused her attention on the Reverend Mother Ramallo, aware now that all this was happening in a frozen instant of time, suspended time for her alone. Why is time suspended? She asked herself. She stared at the frozen expressions around her, seeing a dust mote above Chani's head, stopping there, waiting. The answer to this instant came like an explosion in her consciousness. Her personal time was suspended to save her life. She focused on the psychokinesthetic extension of herself, looking within, and was confronted immediately with a cellular core, a pit of blackness from which she recoiled. That is the place where we cannot look, she thought. There is the place that Reverend Mothers are so reluctant to mention, the place where only a Kwisatz Haderach may look. This realization returned a small measure of confidence, and again she ventured to focus on the psychokinesthetic extension, becoming a mote self that searched within her for danger. She found it within the drug she had swallowed. The stuff was dancing particles within her, its motion so rapid, but even frozen time could not stop them. Dancing particles, she began recognizing familiar structures, atomic linkages, a carbon atom here, helical wavering, a glucose molecule. An entire chain of molecules confronted her, and she recognized the protein, a methyl protein configuration. Ah! It was a soundless mentat sigh within her as she saw the nature of the poison. With her psychokinesthetic probing, she moved into it, shifted an oxygen mote, allowed another carbon mote to link, reattached a linkage of oxygen, hydrogen. The change spread, faster and faster as the catalyzed reaction opened its surface of contact. The suspension of time relaxed its hold upon her, and she sensed motion. The tube spout from the sac was touched to her mouth, gently collecting a drop of moisture. Chani's taking the catalyst from her body to change the poison in that sac, Jessica thought. Why? Someone eased her to a sitting position. She saw the old Reverend Mother Ramallo being brought to sit beside her on the carpeted ledge. A dry hand touched her neck. And there was another psychokinesthetic mote within her awareness. Jessica tried to reject it, but the mote swept closer, closer. They touched. It was like the ultimate simpatico, being two people at once, not telepathy, but mutual awareness, with the old Reverend Mother. But Jessica saw that the Reverend Mother didn't think of herself as old. An image unfolded before the mutual mind's eye. A young girl with a dancing spirit and tender humour. Within the mutual awareness, the young girl said, "Yes, that is how I am." Jessica could only accept the words, not respond to them. "You'll have it all soon, Jessica," the inward image said. "This is hallucination," Jessica told herself. "You know better than that," the inward image said. "Swiftly now, do not fight me. There isn't much time. There came a long pause, then, "You should have told us you were pregnant." Jessica found the voice that talked within the mutual awareness. "Why? This changes both of you. Holy Mother, what have we done?" Jessica sensed a forced shift in the mutual awareness, saw another mote presence with the inward eye. The other mote darted wildly here, there, circling. It radiated pure terror. "You'll have to be strong," the old Reverend Mother's image presence said. "Be thankful it's a daughter you carry. This would have killed a male fetus. Now, carefully, gently, touch your daughter presence. Be your daughter presence. Absorb the fear. Soothe. Use your courage and your strength. Gently now, gently." The other whirling mote swept near, and Jessica compelled herself to touch it. Terror threatened to overwhelm her. She thought it the only way she knew. "I shall not fear. Fear is the mind killer." The litany brought a semblance of calm. The other mote lay quiescent against her. Words won't work, Jessica told herself. She reduced herself to basic emotional reactions, radiated love, comfort, a warm snuggling of protection. The terror receded. Again the presence of the old Reverend Mother asserted itself, but now there was a tripling of mutual awareness. Too active, and one that lay quietly absorbing. "Time compels me," the Reverend Mother said within the awareness. "I have much to give you, and I do not know if your daughter can accept all this while remaining sane. But it must be. The needs of the tribe are paramount. What? Remain silent and accept." Experiences began to unroll before Jessica. It was like a lecture strip in a subliminal training projector at the B'nai Gesserit school. But faster. Blindingly faster. Yet distinct. She knew each experience as it happened. There was a lover, virile bearded, with the dark feminine eyes, and Jessica saw his strength and tenderness, all of them in one blink moment, through the Reverend Mother's memory. There was no time now to think of what this might be doing to the daughter fetus, only time to accept and record. The experiences poured in on Jessica: birth, life, death, important matters and unimportant, an outpouring of single-view time. Why should a fall of sand from a cliff top stick in the memory? She asked herself. Too late. Jessica saw what was happening. The old woman was dying and, in dying, pouring her experiences into Jessica's awareness as water is poured into a cup. The other mote faded back into pre-birth awareness as Jessica watched it, and, dying in conception, the old Reverend Mother left her life in Jessica's memory with one last sighing blur of words. "I've been a long time waiting for you," she said. "Here is my life." There it was, encapsulated, all of it, even the moment of death. I am now a Reverend Mother, Jessica realized, and she knew with a generalized awareness that she had become, in truth, precisely what was meant by a Bene Gesserit Reverend Mother. The poison drug had transformed her. This wasn't exactly how they did it at the Bene Gesserit school, she knew. No one had ever introduced her to the mysteries of it, but she knew. The end result was the same. Jessica sensed the daughter mote still touching her inner awareness, probed it without response. A terrible sense of loneliness crept through Jessica in the realization of what had happened to her. She saw her own life as a pattern that had slowed, and all life around her speeded up so that the dancing interplay became clearer. The sensation of mote awareness faded slightly, its intensity easing as her body relaxed from the threat of the poison, but still she felt that other mote, touching it with a sense of guilt at what she had allowed to happen to it. "I did it, my poor, unformed, dear little daughter. I brought you into this universe and exposed your awareness to all its varieties without any defenses." A tiny outflowing of love comfort, like a reflection of what she had poured into it, came from the other mote. Before Jessica could respond, she felt the adab presence of demanding memory. There was something that needed doing. She groped for it, realizing she was being impeded by a muzziness of the changed drug permeating her senses. I could change that, she thought. I could take away the drug action and make it harmless. But she sensed this would be an error. I'm within a right of joining, and she knew what she had to do. Jessica opened her eyes, gestured to the water sack now being held above her by Chani. "It has been blessed," Jessica said. "Mingle the waters, let the change come to all, that the people may partake and share in the blessing. Let the catalyst do its work," she thought. "Let the people drink of it and have their awareness of each other heightened for a while. The drug is safe now that a Reverend Mother has changed it." Still, the demanding memory worked in on her, thrusting. There was another thing she had to do, she realized, but the drug made it difficult to focus. "Ah, the old Reverend Mother." "I have met the Reverend Mother Ramallo," Jessica said. "She is gone, but she remains. Let her memory be honored in the right." Now where did I get those words? Jessica wondered. And she realized they came from another memory, the life that had been given to her and now was part of herself. Something about that gift felt incomplete, though. "Let them have their orgy," the other memory said within her. "They've little enough pleasure out of living. Yes, and you and I need this little time to become acquainted before I recede and pour out through your memories. Already I feel myself being tied to bits of you. Ah, you've a mind filled with interesting things, so many things I'd never imagined." And the memory mind encapsulated within her opened itself to Jessica, permitting a view down a wide corridor to other Reverend Mothers within other Reverend Mothers within other Reverend Mothers until there seemed no end to them. Jessica recoiled, fearing she would become lost in an ocean of oneness. Still the corridor remained, revealing to Jessica that the Fremen culture was far older than she had suspected. They had been Fremen on Poritrin, she saw, a people grown soft of an easy planet, fair game for Imperial raiders to harvest and plant human colonies on Bela, Tegius, and Seleucia Secundus. Oh, the wailing Jessica sensed in that parting. Far down the corridor, an image voice screamed, "They denied us the Hajj." Jessica saw the slave groups on Bela, Tegius, down that inner corridor, saw the weeding out and the selecting that spread men to Rossack and Harmonthep. Scenes of brutal ferocity opened to her like the petals of a terrible flower, and she saw the thread of the past carried by Sayadina after Sayadina, first by word of mouth, hidden in the sand shanties, then refined through their own Reverend Mothers, with the discovery of the poison drug on Rossack, and now developed this to subtle strength on Arrakis and the discovery of the water of life. Far down the inner corridor, another voice screamed, "Never to forgive, never to forget." But Jessica's attention was focused on the revelation of the water of life, seeing its source, the liquid exhalation of a dying sandworm, a maker, and as she saw the killing of it in her new memory, she suppressed a gasp. The creature was drowned. "Mother, are you all right?" Paul's voice intruded on her. Jessica struggled out of the inner awareness to stare up at him, conscious of duty to him, but resenting his presence. "I'm like a person whose hands were kept numb, without sensation from the first moment of awareness. until one day the ability to feel is forced into them. The thought hung in her mind, an enclosing awareness. And I say, look, I have hands, but the people all around me say, what are hands? Are you all right? Paul repeated. Yes. Is this all right for me to drink? He gestured to the sack in Chinese hands. They want me to drink it. She heard the hidden meaning in his words, realized he had detected the poison in the original unchanged substance, that he was concerned for her. It occurred to Jessica then to wonder about the limits of Paul's prescience. His question revealed much to her. You may drink it, she said. It has been changed. And she looked beyond him to see Stilgar staring down at her, the dark, dark eyes studying. Now we know you cannot be false, he said. She sensed hidden meaning here too, but the muzziness of the drug was overpowering her senses. How warm it was and soothing, how beneficent these Fremen to bring her into the fold of such companionship. Paul saw the drug take hold of his mother. He searched his memory, the fixed past, the flux lines of the possible futures. It was like scanning through arrested instants of time, disconcerting to the lens of the inner eye. The fragments were difficult to understand when snatched out of the flux. This drug, he could assemble knowledge about it, understand what it was doing to his mother, but the knowledge lacked a natural rhythm, lacked a system of mutual reflection. He realized suddenly that it was one thing to see the past occupying the present, but the true test of prescience was to see the past in the future. Things persisted in not being what they seemed. Drink it, Chani said. She waved the hornspout of a water sack under his nose. Paul straightened, staring at Chani. He felt carnival excitement in the air. He knew what would happen if he drank this spice drug of its quintessence of the substance that brought the change onto him. He would return to the vision of pure time, of time become space. It would perch him on the dizzying summit and defy him to understand. From behind Chani, Stilgar said, Drink it, lad. You delay the rite. Paul listened to the crowd then, hearing the wildness in their voices. Listen al-Ghaib, they said. Muad'Dib. He looked down at his mother. She appeared peacefully asleep in a sitting position, her breathing even and deep. A phrase out of the future that was his lonely past came into his mind. She sleeps in the waters of life. Chani tugged at his sleeve. Paul took the hornspout into his mouth, hearing the people shout. He felt the liquid gush into his throat as Chani pressed the sack, sensed giddiness in the fumes. Chani removed the spout, handed the sack into hands that reached for it from the floor of the cavern. His eyes focused on her arm, the green band of mourning there. As she straightened, Chani saw the direction of his gaze, said, I can mourn him even in the happiness of the waters. This was something he gave us. She put her hand into his, pulling him along the ledge. We are alike in a thing, Usul. We have each lost a father to the Harkonnens. Paul followed her. He felt that his head had been separated from his body and restored with odd connections. His legs were remote and rubbery. They entered a narrow side passage, its walls dimly lighted by spaced-out glow globes. Paul felt the drug beginning to have its unique effect on him, opening time like a flower. He found need to steady himself against Chani as they turned through another shadowed tunnel. The mixture of whipcord and softness he felt beneath her robe stirred his blood. The sensation mingled with the work of the drug, folding future and past into the present, leaving him the thinnest margin of trinocular focus. I know you, Chani, he whispered. We've sat upon a ledge above the sand while I soothed your fears. We've caressed in the dark of the sietch. He found himself losing focus, tried to shake his head, stumbled. Chani steadied him, led him through thick hangings into the yellow warmth of a private apartment, low tables, cushions, a sleeping pad beneath an orange spread. Paul grew aware that they had stopped, that Chani stood facing him, and that her eyes betrayed a look of quiet terror. You must tell me, she whispered. You are Sihaya, he said, the desert spring. When the tribe shares the water, she said, we're together, all of us. We share. I can sense the others with me, but I'm afraid to share with you. Why? He tried to focus on her, but past and future were merging into the present, blurring her image. He saw her in countless ways and positions and settings. There's something frightening in you, she said. When I took you away from the others, I did it because I could feel what the others wanted. You press on people. You make us see things. He forced himself to speak distinctly. What do you see? She looked down at her hands. I see a child. In my arms. It's our child. Yours and mine. She put a hand to her mouth. How can I know every feature of you? They've a little of the talent, his mind told him, but they suppress it because it terrifies. In a moment of clarity, he saw how Chani was trembling. What is it you want to say? He asked. Usul, she whispered, and still she trembled. You cannot back into the future, he said. A profound compassion for her swept through him. He pulled her against him, stroked her head. Chani, Chani, don't fear. Yusul, help me, she cried. As she spoke, he felt the drug complete its work within him, whipping away the curtains to let him see the distant grey turmoil of his future. You're so quiet, Chani said. He held himself poised in the awareness, seeing time stretch out in its weird dimension, delicately balanced yet whirling, narrow yet spread like a net gathering countless worlds and forces, a tight wire that he must walk, yet a teeter-totter on which he balanced. On one side he could see the Imperium, a Harkonnen called Fade Ralpha, who flashed toward him like a deadly blade. The Sardaukar raging off their planet despair-red pogrom on Arrakis, the Guild conniving and plotting, the Bene Gesserit with their scheme of selective breeding. They lay massed like a thunderhead on his horizon, held back by no more than the Fremen and their Muad'Dib, the sleeping giant Fremen poised for their wild crusade across the universe. Paul felt himself at the centre, at the pivot where the whole structure turned, walking a thin wire of peace with a measure of happiness, Chani at his side. He could see it stretching ahead of him, a time of relative quiet in a hidden siege, a moment of peace between periods of violence. There's no other place for peace, he said. Yusul, you're crying, Chani murmured. Yusul, my strength, do you give moisture to the dead? To who's dead? To one's not yet dead, he said. Then let them have their time of life, she said. He sensed through the drug fog how right she was, pulled her against him with savage pressure. Sihaya, he said. She put a palm against his cheek. I'm no longer afraid, Yusul. Look at me. I see what you see when you hold me thus. What do you see? He demanded. I see us giving love to each other in a time of quiet between storms. It's what we were meant to do. The drug had him again and he fought. So many times you've given me comfort and forgetfulness. He felt anew the hyper-illumination of its high-relief imagery of time, sensed his future becoming memories, the tender indignities of physical love, the sharing and communion of selves, the softness and the violence. You're the strong one, Chani, he muttered. Stay with me. Always, she said, and kissed his cheek.